professional Scrum trainers Don McGreal and Gary Pedretti. Hey guys,
Hello, good seeing you.
good seeing you. We've been seeing each other for the last 30 minutes. But
Yeah.
all right, so we have an interesting, a little bit different topic today, which is called Maximize Your Training Investment, exploring the right options for your organization's needs, that Don and Gary are going to go through. One of the reasons this is interesting for us because Scrum.org just put out a large survey, and there were indications that people have obviously different preferences for all types of ways to learn. So Don and Gary, they're professional and very experienced trainers, and I thought this was a great opportunity, and they did too, to talk about basically the pros and cons of different ways that organizations are going through training, how they give training, and what the different experiences have been. So let's get into it. Let's go through the quick guidelines. Your microphones will be muted throughout. Session is being recorded as always. Lindsay, my colleague, does a great job of getting the recording and the slides up to the Scrum.org website within 24 hours, but she usually does that even faster. So this is an interactive webinar in the case that you can submit your questions, and I will be posing them to Gary and Don. So that's in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, from me for now, is who's Scrum.org? Scrum.org has a mission to help people and teams solve complex problems. We focus on education, validated learning, and community. Founded by the handsome gentleman Ken Schwaber, who was the co-creator of Scrum, and is very influential in all of our learnings and community. So with that, tried to do it in 2 minutes. I'm going to pass it along to you, Gary.
My name is Indiana Jones. No, Patricia was joking earlier about my hat. My name is Gary Pedretti. I work for Improving as well as Don. Improving is a worldwide company now, a worldwide consultancy, and we both work in the training department. I've been training for Scrum.org since 2011, but training in other capacities even longer. And I have a great interest in software development, focus on value, product management, things like that. And that's about me, Don.
Yep. Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I've been training with Scrum.org since same about 2010, I believe. So Gary and I have known each other a long time. Now we work together at Improving, where I lead the business agility practice there, and I'm also one of the founders. So when we started in 2007, so what's that? 18 years now. There's 12 of us, and now we're up to over 2,000. Gary mentioned we're global now. We just acquired a company in India, but we have offices in Argentina, Chile, Mexico, 5 offices around Canada, and then 8, 9, 10 in the States now. So yeah, what we do is we build software for people. And part of that as well is helping our clients along the way to take over, to prep them for preparing their product for us to work on. And the training team is involved in that quite a bit. So it's another service we offer our clients. So we do a lot of public training, but a lot more private training as well. And that kind of takes us to the agenda. So what, we've noticed a shift as most of the world has here in terms of how training is being delivered, certainly within organizations as well. And so we put this presentation together specific to the clients that we deal with all the time. And so we're going to start with talking about the value of training. Like, let's really get down to what it is we're trying to do when we invest in training within an organization, and really come to terms with that, how we measure it, that sort of thing. And then talk about traditional training, what we're used to, right? Trainer, students over a certain period of time. And we'll talk about some pros and cons for those, and then we'll get into some alternatives. And so we'll run through a series of alternatives, looking at pros and cons of each, and then we'll conclude with sort of like, all right, what can we do with this information? What's it look like going forward? So we'll kick it off with value of training.
Yeah, so it's great, always great to start with why, right? Why would we want to spend money? What are we expecting to get out here? So Some things here, some obvious things, and level set across teams with terminology and techniques. Get everybody on the same page. Sometimes we do training to sort of jumpstart change efforts. Hey, we're going to learn something new. We're going to try something new. Let's get everyone trained on the basics of this new practice or this new technique, this new way of working. And that also helps because you're creating a shared group experience there right at the beginning. It's also a way to experience new ways of working in a low risk environment, right? A classroom or any sort of structured learning is typically a safe place for you to try things out. You don't have to make this work in the real world immediately. You can make it work in the small, make it work in the abstract, and then make it work in the practical, in the real world. You can get guidance and answers from an expert. You can validate learning through the use of assessments and certifications. But ultimately, all of these things and anything else sort of tactical we think of sort of roll up into two things, two reasons we might want training. We want something to change, or we want to support people's growth. Right? We want something to change in an organization, or we're supporting people's growth. If those are the reasons why we're going to train, is there a way that we can understand? Is there a way that we could validate that? Is there a way that we could measure that we've done that? What do you think, Don?
Yeah, and we like doing this, right? Because a lot of times our clients will just kind of throw out, "Hey, we need some training because we have a training budget," or people are asking for it. But really, let's break it down to the why. What outcomes, like what does success look like? Is the typical consulting answer or question, right? But if you boil it down, there's only really these two reasons that Gary mentioned. The organization is here and they want to be here, and they think training is an important component in it, and likely it is. Or they want to support their people. Their people want to get to another level. They want to, they like learning. If you've got good people, that's something that really drives them. So they want to support that. They want to get them to that area. So when we talk about how would you measure the success of this, how you get a return on your investment, these are the things you should be measuring. Not, hey, what scores did we get in the class, or how was attendance? Were they there for, the full 7 hours a day? It should be more around true outcomes. Like, if the goal is, if we've decided that the goal is we want something to change, is it changing as we do this training? Are we adopting the new practices that we want to do? Are the behaviors different? Are people growing? Are people happier because of that? Is attrition down? So however we want to measure, these are the things that we should be using when dealing with training. So we wanted to make sure we hit on that as you consider the return on investment of training and really
Yeah.
on the same page. Yeah.
You mentioned like evaluations of the course. We do that, and that helps us, and that helps our purchasers understand whether we're doing a good job. But that doesn't tell us anything about whether something has changed in your organization or whether people feel supported. So
Yeah. And
we need something else.
it reminds me a little bit. Patricia was talking about Ken Schwaber, the founder of co-founder of Scrum, founder of Scrum.org. But he used to say, "I don't want people to be happy in my classes. I want them to walk out of there pissed off. I want their brain to, because that's what is necessary sometimes, right? To really change behavior. So it isn't. We want people to have a good time. We want them to enjoy it. But is that the real outcomes that we're going for? Yeah.
So let's talk about traditional training first, and then we're going to pose some alternatives. What do we mean by traditional training? We're talking about instructor-led training. And you see from the pictures here, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about in an actual physical classroom or whether it's a virtual classroom through teleconference or Zoom or whatever. This is instructor-led. It's typically a half a day to could be up to 3 days or more, and it involves some combination of lecture and exercises. We kind of know what this is. The important distinction here is that, well, no distinction is we're not making a distinction between a physical classroom and a virtual classroom. This is traditional instructor-led training. We know who the instructor is. We know where the expertise comes from. So pros and cons for this. The curriculum is typically built and guided by experts here. Scheduling gives the training clear priority. If we're going to take a bunch of people, put them into a room or put them all in the same teleconference room for a half a day to 3 days, we're going to have to figure that out. We're going to have to give that some sort of priority. And so that's good. We're able to learn from other students in traditional training, from typical things like water cooler talks, or breakout rooms and things like that. We're able to learn from other students. It's great for team building, and it can be a great primer because, again, you've got this curriculum built and guided by experts. So great primer, great starting point.
Yeah,
But there are some cons too.
as
Yeah.
we use it all the time. Like often we go in and do something more than training, whether it's some consulting and some, but getting everybody in a room and build, it's a quick way to build trust. We find if we can put our consultants in with our clients in a class, in a training thing, it moves us along, gets people excited. After a traditional class, they may not know everything afterwards, but at least we're all on the same page and we're setting expectations.
Yeah. But there are some cons. You're typically scheduling these in large blocks of time, so it's kind of disruptive to day-to-day work. It can be challenging maintaining focus and getting through all of these learning objectives. It tends to stay theoretical. Most exercises and examples are not the students. They typically have like a case study or things like that. And that's good for the safety part of things, but it has its cons. It tends to stay a little bit theoretical. And sometimes people wonder, how am I going to translate this to my real world? And there's typically not any accountability for applying learning. We had a class, the class ends. What happens from there? The class doesn't determine that. What happens from there? And we can summarize those things with a mnemonic here. We got 4 Ds. Traditional training is disruptive. It takes too much time away from day-to-day work. It's dense. It overloads learners with too many objectives. It's detached. It's too theoretical, perhaps lacking in real-world application. And it's disregarded. No accountability for applying the learning. You see some icons there. I just want to point out the anchor. The metaphor here is that you're staying anchored to your old ways. You're staying anchored to the old way of thinking, the old way of doing things. You've disregarded the new stuff.
Yeah, and these are important because in the icons, because as we go through the alternatives, these will come back, right? So just
Yeah.
remember these 4 Ds, and when we bring up the alternatives, we'll talk about how they address some of these as we go.
It's just a note about the decline of traditional training. Um, we've seen a lot of studies and statistics that are suggesting um, there is a decline in training, decline in training budgets. Um, and there's some data that suggests people are interested in something different too. 70% preferring online or self-paced courses. And then, of course, COVID-19 changed the landscape considerably, especially for a in-person classroom, right? A lot more stuff being delivered online. Also, Patricia mentioned one of the things that prompted this webinar is this survey from Scrum.org about how people like to learn. And there were three questions, I think, 3 or 4 questions. And the third question was the one of interest that we might point out here about in which formats do you like to learn. It's worth noting this was a select all that apply, so the responses are not going to add up to 100%. But if you look at the answer choices there, um, you get to the third option before you get to any instructor-led training. The third option is hybrid, some combination of online stuff and instructor-led, and the fourth one is instructor-led. So we've got online self-paced and learning on my own through online resources, videos, blogs, etc. Have a preference here. So things are changing.
Yeah. And that's a good segue into this, right? So we've seen it, we've felt it, we've seen it through the data. Over the years, traditional training isn't as sought after, right? It's not as, or COVID has helped with that. The age, the demographics of the people coming through here, we're noticing even in our classes, it's an older demographic. How people learn is different. The TikTok generation. They're looking for smaller things. They're looking for more immediate gratification. Spending days in a class just isn't as, it's crazy talk nowadays for a lot of folks. So let's get into some alternatives. And the first one we should address is certification. So certification doesn't always have to be with a class, but it is a form of training. Like preparing for the certification is key to this as well. So what do we mean by certification? Well, it's like a third party credential. Scrum.org is a certifying body, right? For Scrum and Agile. And usually there's an assessment. In Scrum.org, you have to take an assessment. You have to pass the assessment in order to earn your certification. Sometimes you need to renew. That's not the case at Scrum.org, but there are a lot of places like with CPAs, accounting, like you're renewing this all the time. And the thinking is it keeps people at a certain level over time. Or maybe it's just a good way of getting money from you more consistently. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of certification. So it does verify understanding of core concepts. It's a great way of making sure that, hey, I did understand this. And it's measured against an objective standard. So you can sort of see like, hey, sometimes you ask yourself, right? "Okay, do I really know this? Can I say that I'm a pro at this?" So it's good even just for yourself, right? It's like a standard that you're measuring yourself against. So that can be reassuring, I suppose. It also is a great way to join a community of practitioners. There's a lot of other folks that get this, and when you see it somewhere on their resume or whatever, you can connect with them on that. You know that they know a certain amount. They have a base level. But honestly, my favorite is this last one. I teach certified classes. I teach non-certified classes, and there's a distinct difference here. When I teach a non-certified class, it could be disregarded. We had that little anchored thing there because they could just be done. They took the class, they enjoyed the class. Oh, this is all great. Sure, we'll do something at some point, but there's human nature, right? It just may not happen. But what this does with certification is that they know they have to prepare for a test. The learning does not end there. They have to go do self-study. They have to go over the material, and all that really is doing is it's reinforcing everything that we went over and beyond. So it's less likely to be disregarded. They're going to apply it. Some of our clients will put together study groups and all that in order to get this done. So it forms that another level of learning beyond the class. So that's what we really appreciate. But there are cons. Sometimes, they take a 2-day class and they pass a fairly easy a test, and now hey, I'm an expert. Look at that, I've got a Scrum Master certification. But I know Scrum.org, and I've heard Ken Schwaber in particular say this, is that he compares the level 1 certifications as getting your driver's license. This does not make you a good, certainly not an expert driver. We will allow you to drive on our streets, but it doesn't make you expert. And so sometimes that's an issue. And we've seen that play out too. It's like, hey, yeah, I took a 2-day class and now I expect to be able to, be a successful Scrum Master or product owner within an organization with no experience, right? That's not the case. Potential for abuse as well, right? If it's industry recognized, people see this as like a resume stamp. They may be using this. They may be getting other people to pass it. We've seen I know Scrum.org's got plenty of stories of people trying to get around that here. And then certification, I mentioned resume stamps as a term here. Sometimes the people that show up to training aren't as interested in the topic, they're more interested in the resume stamp. They're just collecting them. And so that doesn't always have the best impact in a class as well when you're training these things. So a little bit on the certification side, it's certainly relevant here as well to be thinking about this. So let's move on to the next one.
Another alternative, another alternative is self-paced learning. What do we mean by that? This is student-led. The student is driving the schedule here, and typically a combination of media, videos, books, articles, audiobooks, any of this, all of that is okay. It can include validation through tests and quizzes, but it could be, there's a wide range here in self-paced. It could be anything from, I'm going to take a weekend and I got to watch some videos so that I can fix my car, to I'm going to use Udemy or something like that, some platform, and somebody has put together a specific curriculum and a set of tests and quizzes and things like that, a real structured curriculum guided by an expert. That's what we just did with the release of the PSPBM Skills self-paced course for Scrum.org. Um, and I don't know if you want to add anything about that course, Patricia, or the
Um,
ideas here.
Yeah, I mean, we just recently, for those who may have seen it, you can see it on our homepage, scrum.org, but we recently did that, and it's really, we've been looking at the data and the evidence of, you guys saw this, Gary was showing it, of people wanting to have something self-paced, and it's really been about flexibility and time and frankly cost. So it's not a one-to-one 2 hour in-person course, but I feel that we've done a really good job of trying at least to really think about how can we make this as effective as possible and to make it accessible. So, for those people out there who are interested in this, it is something that Scrum.org is trying to do, maintaining the quality that we have in our trainer-led courses. So that's out there.
Yeah. So talking about pros and cons here for self-paced learning. It's self-paced, it's on demand. You can figure it out. I got 10 minutes here. Maybe I watch part of a video. You can focus on these smaller chunks of learning, and that means easier scheduling, fitting it in at various places. And the media here, the online videos and audiobooks, these sorts of things tend to be very natural to tech-savvy learners. And tech-savvy learners are looking for things like this. This is how they learn things like how to fix their car or whatever. This is very, very natural to a tech-savvy learner. So it helps with the disruptive part because we can find smaller chunks of time. We don't have to have a huge block of time, and it helps with the density. I can learn a little bit now. I can learn a little bit later. I don't have to tackle 25 learning objectives in 2 days. But there's still some cons, of course. Unless you have a good curriculum, like it's guided by an expert, like what we're talking about with the skills course that we just released with Scrum.org, it's going to be a kind of a choose your own adventure. And if you're trying to learn about something, you're not the expert on that thing. So choosing your own adventure might work out and it might not. This is lonely also without the shared experience of others. A lot of things happen when you build rapport and you hear empathy. You get empathy with some of your colleagues, things like that when you're in a classroom, right? That's not going to be here. You need to maintain motivation. You need to be intrinsically motivated here to keep going through this. It's unlikely, not necessarily you couldn't, it depends on the platform and things like that, but it's unlikely you're going to learn from classmates. You certainly will probably interact with them much less. And it's unlikely to ask instructors questions, or certainly not in a live and interactive way that you would in a classroom.
And if I had to pick one of these, it's that the motivation one is the one that we notice the most. We've got quite a few clients. In fact, actually, as a consulting company, we've done it internally ourselves, and we like to think we've got some of the best technologists around. And it's great for some people, but some people just simply cannot learn this way. I'd probably put myself in that category. Is that I know it's there, it just doesn't get to the top of my list, and we keep kicking that can down the road. Whereas when it's scheduled, you can just go and you're there, it's time aside from it. So this is the thing we just keep hearing over and over again with clients is like, yeah, we have this, we paid for the license, but it's like 10% of our registered people are actually even using it. So it's something to consider with your group for self-paced. That motivation is a key thing. So let's talk about other options here. This is one that we've used quite a bit with clients. Immersion learning program at our company, we call it a DLP, Deeper Learning Program. And Scrum.org does this with their training as well. So it's the immersion one. You can go down the Scrum.org website. There's information around it. But the key thing here is, like Gary mentioned, we're doing sometimes 25, 30, 40 learning objectives in a short period of time, a fire hose of information that is very hard you're not walking away knowing all those learning objectives, right? But that's what the market has kind of settled on, right? We take the class, we sheep dip everybody and check that box, right? Everybody's trained. So what this does is it deals with the real outcomes that we talked about before. We want behaviors to change. We want things to change. So what if we just took those learning objectives and rather than just fire hose them over a short period of time, we distributed them across weeks? And then we apply them as we learn them. We don't just learn them, we learn them and then go do them in something in our world, in our space. So here's an example of the PSPO class from Scrum.org, broken out into 8 weeks. And where we do an hour debrief each time, and then we introduce a new couple of learning objectives, not a ton. Then maybe we do some reading. And then we do an assignment. So like if we're going over like what makes good metrics, that's the topic, then the assignment will be, hey, go come up with three of those and a product goal for your product. Come back next week. The first hour you debrief, you get feedback in a safe environment from your colleagues, from the facilitator. Here's an example of one that we did with clients where each session they go across their products and actually fill in the blanks, do the work, business model, metrics, backlogs, that kind of thing. And so they're applying. By the end of it, they can say they didn't just learn the things, they applied the learning objectives. So there's some key things here with this, right? Space between learning. It's time to breathe, let them sink in and apply. It's a group effort as well, so there's that in the accountability that I know that in our next session next week where I'm showing stuff, right? So hey, I got to get some things ready, so it keeps that going. The stuff you don't get with self-paced, right? You can actually apply the learnings like we mentioned. It's a safe environment. And per week, it deals with this. It's not like you're gone. You can still do your day job because these are like 3 hour sessions per week. And when we do this in practice, there are some weeks we just can't do because of holidays or client dates that are already made up. So we figure out that schedule based on our organizations that we work with. So
Yeah, and Don,
go ahead.
I really like in terms of the 4Ds and how it addresses all of them. I really like how you talked about how density and the dense and disregarded oftentimes go together. When I have 25 learning objectives, 2 days, and I get done, which one of these things do I apply? In immersion, it's here's a little thing, go apply it. Here's a little thing, go apply it. So it's handling the density and disregarding sort of at the same time. It's a really good point.
Good point. It prioritizes it, right? Because if they're all important, nothing is sort of thing. It's like
Yeah.
where do I even start? But this gives it that. Yeah. So it applies to all four of the Ds, right? And so that should be a pretty obvious thing there, how you can connect all of them there. Now there are some downsides. Obviously, it's a longer time commitment over. I mean, this is 8 weeks. We've done a few customized ones where they're a little bit more because they want to add extra sections, or a little bit less because they aren't as interested in them.
And
But
here we're talking about like elapsed time,
yes,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Like
not
the calendar time.
not in
Yeah.
the calendar time, but even actual time because if you do the math, it is spread out, but there's time in between you're spending when our trainers do these, they're spending time with the students in between. We usually have some sort of group chat going on. There's conversations, discussions going, which is all positive. But it's a longer elapsed time, right? 8 to 10 weeks sort of thing. It requires more discipline. So to actually do the work in between those weeks. That's where this thing comes apart. If they're not doing that, it's not as so. If you're going to commit to this, um, it is a commitment. We've got to make sure we set expectations, and we do that with this. Is like, hey, there's going to be work, and if you make it through, you're really going to know it. So if you've got a group of, let's say, product owners or scrum masters or whatever skill, and you really want to get them to the to here, we feel this is like the best way to do it. You're getting them through it all, and they will have done all the things by the end. But we need a commitment, likely a good working agreement, so that we hold each other accountable along the way. So it is a commitment, but it is worth it in the end. And they have to be able to apply the learnings, right? So sometimes they're not, maybe they don't have a product if they're taking a product owner course. Like they have to have real world work. So it takes a little bit of upfront planning with us to figure out, all right, well, how are we going to do this? How should we group them together to do work together around things that are applicable in that organization? So that's the immersion learning program. You can find out more on the scrum.org site around how we can do that. And that can be done with any of the classes. And then Similarly, we have we do this a lot. We call it the lab at Improving, and this is a focused period of time. We like to say we set outrageous goals, and then we go and do them. So it's not training. Like we may pull up something as needed, but we put together agendas specifically based off of the client's needs. So these are some examples of the ones we've done, like foundational, getting people up and running with something like a good product and vision, or understanding their customers, stuff like that, building a product backlog, or going to the next level, like modernizing, applying flow concepts to Scrum, bringing in UX, better measures, right? These are labs that we usually just say a day, but depending on their needs, we might go a little bit longer than that. And then innovation, right? Hey, how do we take this to the next level? How do we add to our roadmap? How do we find new ways of generating value? So what we would do is we would do some upfront planning. We get everybody in the room, and the difference here is but the outcome is some work product that you can go use. And we like using the term lab because it's an experiment, right? We'll build something and we'll learn from it. Maybe it's worth using, maybe it's not, right? Team topology lab's a good example. I know there's a lot of weirdness around changing your teams, around restructuring them around products and value, but what could it look like? What if we just took everybody that we have and reorganized them into teams that could be more focused on that? And we're not saying you have to do it. Let's just do an experiment, right? And so those are the kinds of things we do in the labs here. So a lab is a safe space to experiment. We're not saying you have to do it. Let's just do an experiment to see what it could look like. Um, uh, what could a new dashboard look like, or a new roadmap, or that sort of thing? These are this is what we would put together. And then this results in actual work outcomes. There's more obvious return on investment here. Um, and we will come up with them as needed. We just had a client say, "Hey, we're trying to apply this to our teams, our engineers. We trained all their product owners and Scrum Masters, went through the immersion training last year, and now we're focusing on the engineers. So we're doing things like a definition of done lab, where by the end of that, we'll have a definition of done, working agreement along with that. So we can come up with new things and we prepare it with them. So it's still a short amount of time, and yeah. So it's not as dense because it deals with that, because we are dealing with individual learning objectives. It's not a pile of them. It's stuff that we need in the moment, right? Just in time. And it's definitely it's not disconnected to the real world. We're not using some external case study. We're doing this for their world. So if we're building a backlog, it's not some pet store thing that we invented over here. It's let's do it with your real product. Downsides, it does take prep time. We usually want to spend at least an hour with our clients beforehand. We want to look at what they have, where they are. We want to better understand that, so we're not spending time in the session learning this stuff and wasting their time. And you need the right people in the room, right? We need decision makers in the room is a big caveat to this in order to make these things happen. We can't leave there with more questions than answers. So those are two of the main things that are harder with this. Cool. And the last one is field work. We call it field work. And it's consulting, coaching by your side. You're learning by your side. The goal is the same, right? When you're doing this, the goal is still to transfer knowledge. So we've gone from traditional, we've talked about the immersion, we've talked about self-paced, but the goal is always to take information and transfer it to others. And that can be done with just somebody there with you along the way. So this is often called coaching, mentoring, there are all forms of this. You're learning by seeing people do it and doing it. So we have programs that we put in place for this as well. Sometimes it's teed up with a class to prime it, and then we do this. So we have a consultant that, works with them, and maybe it's the first month or two or three, or sprints if you're using sprints. Where our consultant will show, like, here's, if it's a Scrum Master learning, or a product owner, we will play that role in the first sprint. But in the second one, we're going to do it with you. We'll do it together, right? And then so you're doing, but you have somebody by your side. And then the third one, it's observe while we transfer that. So we're observing, you're facilitating, as opposed to the first month, it's the opposite. and you're taking ownership of that. And what we've noticed though, when we do this, is we can get these practices in place, but if we were to go away at that point, what we've noticed is people tend to, if anything changes, go back to what they're used to. So we also talk about like true coaching happens after that. We can't start necessarily coaching. Coaching is about the discipline practice, right? A personal trainer, like making sure you know how to do all the work, but are you doing it? Is it a habit yet? Likely not after 3 months. So we want to spend time as like it's maybe not as full time, but hey, are you still doing it? Are you still keeping up an accountability partner to make sure that these practices are in place so that it ensures more stickiness along the way? So obviously this is a longer time investment. It's good to kind of put some maybe bookends from a training perspective here. Like maybe we train the whole team, but then we're there to support them with those applied learning afterwards. And then maybe we look at certification training after the whole program. But these are things that we do as well on here. So obviously, this is just in time learning. Like we don't have a set agenda necessarily. It's as they come up, your consultant will help with this in the field. So it's obviously applied to real work, and because of that, you can see that it hits on all of these, right? It's not disruptive. If anything, they're helping you move faster with your day job. It's not as dense because we only apply them as needed. Certainly not disconnected because it is your work. And it is not because of the coaching aspect, it's not like you'll just throw it away afterwards. Downside, it's sometimes harder just showing up and especially if somebody puts you into a team and without their permission, that becomes hard, right? So setting the stage properly, building trust, working agreements, coaching agreements is a key thing. But you can't make somebody work out is the analogy we use quite a bit. So there's got to be a mutual agreement there. And it is a longer term commitment. I mean, it's harder to scale because, with training, you can throw in 20 people in a classroom. DLP, same thing, or immersion, same thing. Certainly, self-paced scales the best, but this is much more one-on-one stuff, or one to four, usually we say. Um, so, anyways, that's kind of all of those, but here's the summary of them
Yeah,
all.
here's a summary. Yeah, here's a summary that focuses on where does the course material come from? Where do the exercises and or case study come from? What's the density? And which of the four Ds, the four downsides of traditional training, does it address?
Gary,
So
if I
go ahead.
could actually ask you to keep this slide up, and I know you're going to walk through it, but we have some actually really specific questions where I think it might be interesting to say, oh, what training might help. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm just going to start from some of these that I love how specific this is. So, one of our attendees has a team that does testing validation software. So they have constant commitments of testing, and they're trying to develop automated tests to help, right? And so they're trying to get more effective with that. They're using Scrum to centralize their work. They started with Kanban, and by that time they're integrating more Scrum events and the accountabilities to move their projects forward. What training do you recommend in terms of for them in terms of combining software development with their testing commitments? And I think in general, this would be about like practice-oriented training. When people are thinking about those type of things.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a combination of things here. And this makes a nice segue into where we're going to go next. But I think there's a nice combination of things here. You want to figure out how to test early, test first, things like that. I could think of with traditional training, the APS-SD, Applied Professional Scrum for Software Developers from Scrum.org, touches on TDD, test-driven development. And shows you some stuff and gives you an abstract, trainer provided exercises to go through. Ultimately, though, that a lot of people struggle with how to apply that in the real world. Maybe they're dealing with the Salesforce API or they're dealing with something else that doesn't neatly fit into an easy example. And so some sort of lab or field work to support that afterwards probably makes a lot of sense also
Yeah.
to actually be effective.
Like lab is a good one as well, where it's let's do an experiment on like if it's automation they're talking about, what could we automate in one day? Like with an expert by your side. Now we're going to want to see the stuff beforehand, work with us, but we're going to spend a day automating this. And one of the things I think I'm reading with the question here is something we get a lot in with Scrum teams in general is we don't have time to improve. We get all these deadlines, right? Well, that's up to the team, right? If you're doing Scrum, you're the one that's taking on forecasting the right amount of work every sprint. Well, if we recognize that we have some technical debt and there's automation that we need to do, but we just don't have time to do it, then the onus is on us to carve that out. So yeah, the amount of the throughput that we're going to have this sprint will go down as we improve. So that could be training, that could be investing in new tooling, that could be fixing issues, technical debt, defects, right? It's as professionals, it's on us to carve that time out. So could some of these fit better in that world? Yeah. I mean, like imagine the immersion one is where we commit to 3 hours a week during the sprint, or maybe it's 3 hours a sprint. It doesn't have to be per week, but working that out with our stakeholders, creating transparency around it, saying, here's the issue we have, and we're not going to deal with it unless we create space for it, is something that teams need to get good at presenting and standing up for. And done with the right leadership, I think that they understand it. In my experience, they believe it. They just want to know what the plan is. So hopefully these can fit into that plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great just to kind of, as you're getting into the summary.
Yeah, no, that does. It works well because the right answer after all of this, the right answer from a conclusion perspective is it depends, right? Is like what is the right move? How do you maximize your training investment? There's no one size fits all, but it's certainly not one. It's not the extreme of hey, we're just going to train everybody, and we say this as a company that does a lot of training out there. Just putting everybody in a class and checking that box isn't going to do it. It just won't. It might get people thinking about it or maybe excited, but without support afterwards, that investment is gone. You will not get the return on that investment. So be thinking about where you want to be and how to measure it, like we talked about before, and then apply these things as needed. So by looking at different models, then this is how we present it is like, hey, we can do some work in the classroom. There's benefits to that, right? Structured learning, the field where we can have somebody by your side along the way to make sure this is happening. So we protect your investment kind of thing. And then the lab, right? Where if it's somewhere in between. So maybe we want to be here, but there's some big things like test automation that we haven't been able to overcome, or team topologies, or a backlog, and we can just go do that in a lab. But ultimately, when we sit down with our clients, we're figuring out, how should we design this? So here's just an example of how we can integrate those models. So maybe we have a team that needs to get to a certain skill level in whatever. Maybe it's testing. Why don't we go with that for a plan? So maybe we do some training for the whole team around testing just to level set. What do we mean? What does good testing look like? What should we be doing? How do we measure success for testing? And we do a couple of days training for that. But we don't want to just leave them there. We will say, hey, we have a consultant that can help you now, and they're in the training, so you're building a relationship with them. They're there to help, and this is a slow handoff over time. It's not 40 hours a week all the way through, but that first period we call it anchoring. That about half the time is they're modeling good behavior. They're helping you get to that level. And for the last half, they are checking in, making sure that the discipline practice is happening. And then maybe we do hey, we're trying to do this testing, but our backlog isn't in a good state at all. We've got items on our backlog called testing, and we've learned that's not the right way to do it. So we need to go in and redo the whole backlog. There's no real vision for the product. So maybe these are a couple of labs that we'll do, at the beginning with the consultant before we start. So we will have a vision and a backlog built the right way in order for us to start. And then, we'll do an immersion with your product owners. And maybe there's some analysts or Scrum and other people that might take part of this. And then along the way, maybe we decide, hey, let's get in some just DevOps practices where by the end of this, we'll maybe create a CI/CD pipeline or whatever we decide to do. The executives, it turns out, are maybe they don't know how to best support teams doing this anymore, and they need to understand this. So we schedule a regular traditional 1 day training for them, a flow lab as well, because now at a certain point, it's like, hey, you guys have got Scrum down, but maybe let's introduce some Kanban concepts and different ways of measuring our throughput. And then we do an innovation lab at the end to say, hey, we were able to do all this, and now that we've got that foundation, where are we going in the future? How do we find the next most important thing? And the output of this might be a new backlog, a new roadmap, a new customer segment, or a value proposition. Maybe that's where we do some certification, put the leaders through another immersion. So this is just an example. Maybe you also give them some access to some of the self-paced stuff along the way. But this is the reality is not just do one thing. Let's put a plan together and focus on outcomes and not outputs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the things you see that filled in as Don built the slide would probably have arrows coming out from the consultant, meaning the consultant was on the ground, they learned these things. We need more executive support. There's people aren't quite getting it. So March comes around, that's what we do. So yeah, that being in the field helps inform and helps us help you structure and schedule the right things.
Yeah.
All right. We thought this would be shorter than we meant for it to be, huh?
Yeah.
There was just one little question about this, and then we have some kind of different ones. But as you're going into you were showing the integrating of training models to just emphasize it's not a silver bullet. But there was a small question, I see it in the chat, about an 8-week. Is it when you're talking about immersion, do you envision that like with improving, is it just like, oh, let's all register for this 8-week course, or is that something that's a little different?
Well, so when we've done this before, we're working with the client and it's a group of people, like if it's product owners, we've done it for the advanced Scrum Master class, advanced product owner class, Scrum Master with leadership, we've done it for. So, but we would figure it out. So like every Monday afternoon from 2 to 5
Yeah,
is
so this is like with a customer. It's not necessarily like a public cohort is
yeah.
jumping,
So
which is also an option for
it's an
training.
option with public, but when we do this, it's private is makes the most sense for us. I know that trainers are able to put these publicly, but we've been doing it strictly privately for clients because it is a cohort that's together. They're in the same world. They're learning from each other in the same business. This would be harder to coordinate, let's say, with people coming from all sorts of different organizations. Yeah.
That's not to say there aren't options for people who individually want to jump into something that spans over several weeks
Yeah.
for a one-type of
Yeah.
training.
You can on
Um,
Scrum.org, you can reach out to trainers that apply this stuff. And I know some have put together public cohorts before. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So thank you for showing that. I think I would love if we actually go back to that summary slide, Gary. I think
Mhm.
you're driving. So maybe Gary, if you want to take this question is what kind of training do you recommend for neurodiverse people?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a wide open question too. Neurodiversity manifests in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
Um, wow, that's a great question. This is definitely where I would think about what our conclusion is, which is there's no one silver bullet here. And because I again, it manifests in many different ways. I would I would try out these different modes or these different styles. I would try out these different styles and see how they work with your particular brain, right? Um, I do think, yeah, and then take a look at the 4Ds. Is it the density? Is it like I can't sit in a room for 8 hours and try to absorb all of this stuff? I'm then I'm and if that's really if that's really true, like I know I'm not going to get anything out of that. Maybe you avoid traditional training altogether. Um, but yeah, I would take a look at um, the four Ds there and which ones are the biggest sticking points, I guess, for you.
Yeah. And it
Does that
does,
make sense?
it really does depend because there isn't one form of it, right? So, I think if you have attention deficit disorder, self-paced is really hard, right? Going through, and you might need more of the structure. You thrive with that structure. But in other forms, it's like that's too much. I need my own time to think, and the density I just can't handle. So I think the answer here is the diversity is what's important. Like they can choose, and if you've got a group of people you're trying to, like, they can decide what's best for them, as opposed to only assuming the traditional way is good, which doesn't work for neurodiversity as well.
Yeah.
But
Whereas
just having the option. Yeah.
self-paced, you might have things where because there's reader, well, not for neurodiversity, but in general in diversity, there's different options in there that are gonna help. So
And if you're struggling with whoever asked the question, if you're struggling with this personally, um, take the recording of this webinar and show it to your training coordinator, whoever's buying training at your organization, something like that. Hey, let's try some of these different things. Is there a way that we can provide different types of training for different people?
yeah, that's great. Okay, we're getting into some really specific Scrum.org questions. Don McGreal, I love this for you. What's the difference between PSM, Professional Scrum Master, the first one, and PSPO, Professional Scrum Product Owner Training Course Certifications, in your opinion, on the content and recognition in the job market?
So the difference between those two.
In terms of course content, which obviously is, there's topics, but the recognition in the job market is interesting. Maybe the demand that you guys are seeing at improving might talk to
Yeah,
that.
well, I mean, I would definitely say over time, the product owner one has, outpaced Scrum. It used to be Scrum Master, but I think over time the market has kind of shifted. There's a lot of Scrum Masters out there, and then the focus has been moved towards product a little bit more over time. So we're seeing like that's our number one course. It has been for the last few years, is on the product owner side, the professional Scrum product owner and advanced classes. And we do a lot more that aren't Scrum related in terms of the product space as well. So, and you were seeing that even in Scrum.org, we're teaching classes that aren't Scrum based, like with the validation and discovery stuff, which applies more on the product owner
Mm.
side. So these are things that I think have a wider audience on the product space because, it's not a Scrum thing. It's stuff we deal with much more beyond the Scrum side of things.
Mhm.
I don't know
Um,
if that answers the
Oh,
question.
yeah, I would also say in terms of the curriculum, like the Scrum Master, the PSM focuses very much on self-organization and the right mindset for the Scrum Master, figuring out how to take it to the team and not it just being a dump, but like how to take it to the team, how to be effective. Whereas the product owner course is more about coming up with a good product vision, leading with strategy, and then moving down into tactics with backlog management and things like that. So the curriculum is definitely different between those two
yeah.
classes.
Actually, Gary, if I can stay with you. So for
Yeah.
individuals who are on their own learning journey, potentially, I'm just basing it off making assumptions from this question. They're an individual, they're moving on and they want to know how to not just get started, but how to move forward. So this person completed their PSM2 certification and it's their only Scrum certification. They skipped the first one, I guess. How should they proceed? Would you
Ooh,
recommend?
ah, another good question. And this person is kind of learning on their own.
It
Is
sounds
that
like
right?
that because they completed their PSM2 only.
Okay. And they're looking for the next steps, things like
Right.
that. Yep. And because we've got a context here, which is Scrum and the PSM specifically, this would be a great opportunity for you to check out the professional Scrum competencies on the Scrum.org website, and we lay out different learning objectives that you might want to go through, and then we provide different things that support those learning objectives, including links to videos, links to blog posts, as well as recommended classes, etc. I think I can send this to everyone. That is the link I just put in the chat is the the base page for the professional Scrum competencies, and you can see by role go off. You can go off from there and see the different learning objectives and the different recommended learning sources.
Thank you. Don, I think, so we have time for a couple more questions, but we're wrapping up. I'm going to take this question and wrap it into what I think is an important question for people who are in L&D or thinking about their training budgets. So the question that's being asked in the Q&A is why are, I think, trainer-led courses generally expensive? And I think, Don, if you could speak to also like, when companies experience volatility or we're all experiencing potentially some economic volatility, how do we deal with, the importance of training and investing in ourselves at that time when generally training budgets are the first to go? So how would you balance those two and think about that for the individual and an organization about the expense of training?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, training, instructor-led training is expensive. There's a lot of investment that goes into the content and the preparation for it. But probably a bigger thing is, if it's like a typical 2-day class or whatever, that's, a trainer might be able to do one of those a week. So just when you look at the amount of time is spent on these things and what's needed, that's kind of, and it's kind of market driven in that sense too. Um, what we usually do when we talk to our clients about this is let's look at the outcomes that we're trying to achieve here, right? If we've got a group of 10 to 20 people in a class like that, and we're hoping for change to happen, what's the cost of that, right? If you think about it, the cost of having those people in a room for 2 days probably outweighs what you're paying for the class. So when you look at your overall group of people and the expense of having like a team for a sprint, the cost of that is quite a bit. So you should be thinking, hey, is this class going, if I could get a 10% increase in productivity of this team that's costing, I've done this math before with when I was a product owner because I had to know what my teams cost. They could be costing anywhere from, up to 100,000 a month. So if I'm spending 10, 15,000 on a class, can I get that 10% in a month? Right? If I could get 10%, it's paid for itself. If I get that 10% over the course of 6 months, it's paid for itself, right? So I think we need to start thinking more in terms of what that payout is. You're spending a lot more on these teams. So a team building the wrong thing for 6 months is going to be a lot more expensive. Or a team incapable of getting some value out the door is a huge expense. So be weighing it with that, right? What is your return on investment?
Yeah.
Or what if you were to do traditional training and they don't apply any of the learning,
Yeah.
so you're not following up on that, then you've just wasted that money. So instead, think about the value that you get for the money that you're spending.
All
And then
right.
with the downturn in the economy, I've been through two recessions with this, and yeah, training is the first to go, and that's just a natural, like if we don't know where we're going, investing in our people is hard when we're just trying to keep the lights on, right? If that's the mindset. But what we do find is as a consulting company, because of that risk, there may be other options like Fieldwork helps a little bit more because I can say if I may not want to hire, but I could bring in consultants. I know the rates are higher, but I manage my risk that way. So I could bring in people that can be doing this alongside us to be training in that side where I can't afford to hire, but I could say, hey, let's bring in some consultants because if things do get crazy, we can shift much easier. It gives us more flexibility. So that's what we've noticed is consulting goes up, training goes down during these uncertain markets, I guess.
On that note, how can people get in touch with you both, Gary and Dawn? And for everyone, thank you so much for being here. Feel free to contact Gary and Dawn with your there were some Scrum questions in there. So some team and Scrum questions, take those to Gary and Dawn. So is this the best way, your emails and
Yeah,
LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is great. Improving.com, you can get in touch with us there or see offerings and things that we do. So it's easy enough website to think of. But LinkedIn is always great and always happy to continue the conversation if there are any questions you want to throw my way that way, find me on LinkedIn.
All right.
We'll figure it out together.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gary and Don. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and see you soon. Scrum on.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.